Hello, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time to our expert talk. I'm hearing some noise by at Jarl's. Oh, okay, no.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time.
Jarl, I think you have your live stream open, and now we get some delay in your thing.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome for the first time. Jarl, I think you have your...
Yeah, okay, this is better. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. Let's retry this. Welcome to our second expert talk of the day. My name is Hugo Emmerzaal. I'm a film and a music critic from the Netherlands, and it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jarl Hector, widely experienced creative producer, music supervisor, recently co-founder of ClearMusic, which I presume you're going to talk a lot about today. Hopefully, Jarl is going to give us some insights in the complex and strange, but also very important world of music rights and licensing for filmmakers specifically today. We're gonna have a pretty packed program, I think. So, I'm just gonna give the floor to you to share some insights, give us your expert talk, and then to everybody that's watching and listening, feel free to ask your questions in the comments, in the chat. After y'all's talk, there will be plenty of time for Q&A so we can answer your questions. Well, without further ado, Jarl, thank you so much for being with us today, and the floor is all yours.
Thank you, Hugo. Thanks, and also thanks for the invitation from In-Edit Festival. It's always nice to share a little bit of insights and knowledge. I think that's very important. The more we know and the more knowledge we share together, the more we can help each other and make nice things, and that's at the end of the day what it's all about. Very briefly about me before we dive into the music rights. Indeed, my name is Jarl Hector, and I am co-founding ClearMusic at the moment. So we just went live last week. I've worked for a big company called Universal Music and Universal Music Publishing for a long time. I've been a music supervisor and creative producer at AMP Amsterdam for about 7 years. And after I had a sabbatical traveling around India a year ago, I came back, started freelancing as a music consultant, and now I'm founding ClearMusic. If you want to know more about that, you can head to the website clearmusic.nl, and there it will be fully explained what we do. But one of the important things we do is actually clearing music for film and documentaries as well. So without further ado, let's dive into the things I wanted to talk about. And this is basically a presentation I give to third and fourth year students of music management at the Utrecht School of Arts, where we go a little bit deeper into song rights and master rights, music rights, essentially. This is key to understanding when you want to use music in film. To know, like, an important thing is to know the difference between songs and recordings. So if we take a very clear example of Adele, she's both a songwriter and a record producer, a record recording artist. As a songwriter, she produces songs and compositions, but as a recording artist, she produces master sound recordings. They may not seem very different, but from a music right point of view, they're very different, and we will come to that shortly. As a songwriter, she's represented by a publisher, and as a recording artist, she is represented by a record label. And what do these parties represent? The publishing right and the master rights. Well, if you've ever tried to clear music for a documentary or for a film, you would have probably have heard about these things. As you will see, these are different companies. So her publishing rights are assigned to Universal Music Publishing Group, and her master rights, well, actually right now they're assigned to Sony Music, but in the past, they were assigned to Beggars Group, which is part of Excel Recordings. So that's her as a person. Now, if we take the song Hello from Adele, her famous song, she didn't write that by herself. She wrote that together with Gregory Kirsten, who's also a songwriter, composer, has a music publisher. But as you can see all the way in the left bottom, that's a different publisher. So if you would want to use this song for anything, you would have already 3 parties to talk to. 2 publishing parties, Universal and Sony ATV. And for the master, Excel Recordings. Now, if you were going to use a cover, and this is something we often hear, it's like, well, the artist said it was okay, so it's all good, right? Well, even if you would use the Beth version of Hello, which is an Adele cover, even though you're dealing with a different record label and a different sound recording, you're still dealing with Universal Music Group and Sony ATV Publishing. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, this is something we can go through quite fast because this is mostly for commercial advertising use, but as a filmmaker, you might want to keep in mind the synchronization right here at the bottom. If you can see my mouse. This is what you, the rights you need to be able to put a piece of music in a film. Now, who do you talk to? Who is your first point of reference? Typically in the Netherlands, it's Buma Stemra. For the UK, for instance, it would be PRS. In the US, it's ASCAP and BMI, and almost every country has its own different organization. The UK one, the PRS, is also active in a few other countries. You would typically approach them to find out who is the music publisher, and then the music publisher is the party who you would negotiate a license with. And these are a little bit less interesting. For example, live performance. If you want to play the music at a radio station, or like Inedit is doing right now with the Buma Stemra, the screenings that are happening at the Ketelhuis today, the Ketelhuis actually has a deal with the Buma Stemra in order to be able to play that music. So they have a license for the music they use. And every professional music user has something like that. So a radio station would have that, a TV station would have that, Netflix has that. They all go through the public rights organization. And then there's different kind of rights, but this is for right now, it's a little bit too far-fetched to go into. So that's her as the songwriter. Now on the master side, Adele as the recording artist. Again, if you want to use the synchronization right, for using content, so for instance, a movie, you would talk to the record label. And but if you want her as a recording artist, if you want her to be there present at the premiere, typically you would talk to the booking agent. So you see, there isn't a performance rights organization there when you want to have her live, to have her be present. And the same with if you want an endorsement, if you want Adele to be endorsing your brand or your movie, typically you would talk to the artist manager. There is one form of performance rights that are still going to a public rights organization, the SENA, for broadcast and in-store use. So typically radio stations, but also theaters. So the Ketelhuis in this case has a deal with SENA for the music they use. And again, in every country, it's if they have it, it's a different organization. And I believe in the US they don't have a typical situation like this. It would go through the record label. So this is the whole spider web, and this is something I always go back to, like to sort of figure out, okay, what are we going to do here? Is it a synchronization right for using in a movie? Or is it a reproduction right? Are we going to sell CDs or sell downloads? And using this diagram, I kind of know who to talk to. So to dive into music publishers a little bit more, the music publishers represent the copyright. And these are some examples of a few big music publishers, at least in the Netherlands. So the three major ones, Sony ATV, Universal, and Warner Chappell. And then there's a few major indies. Cobalt, BMG is very big as well. Cloud9 is one of the independents. And Music All Stars is an interesting one. It's tied to Spinning Records. So on the music labels, which is signified by the P logo, if you see that, you might actually see that if you go to a Spotify album, you will often see like this symbol, and it stands for phonogram, which essentially means master right. So the owner of the recording. And these are typical record labels. So you will see a correlation there, even though they're different companies. So if we go back 2 slides, Sony, ETV, Universal, and Warner Chappell. See different logos with the same sort of similar names, and they have a similar heritage, but somewhere along the line they split up, and they often still work together. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. But these are the parties that typically represent master rights, so recordings, the things that you can actually hear. So not the sheet music or the composition, not the copyright, but the master sound recording. The three major ones: Sony, Universal, and Warner Music Group, and then there's a couple of independents here as well, just for as an example. But of course, anybody can start a label, just like anybody can start a publishing company. So there are going to be thousands and thousands of labels worldwide. Collective rights management. This is not so interesting, I think, for film documentary producers. But just so you know, in the Netherlands, there's a situation where we have 4, and typically most composers, most artists are going to be a member in one or several of these organizations. And the one you're most concerned with as a film producer is the duplication right, because when you put a piece of music underneath a film, like legally that is considered a duplication of that piece of music, and you would have to make a deal with the Stemra. For instance, if you're making DVDs, the Stemra is the party to go to get you a license to use that music. Then there is the Norma. I think as an actor, you can actually be a member of that as well. And the SENA for the neighboring rights for disclosure. So when something is aired on radio or TV, the musician who is playing in that stream or that broadcast is actually getting paid for that. And the SENA is the organization that handles that. But as a filmmaker, you usually don't have that much to do with them. Now, in the US, or not in the US, actually worldwide, but for recordings that are done in the US or in Canada, there is something called union fees. 2 of these unions are AFM and SAG-AFTRA, and they, on behalf of musicians, and they often go in quite hard, they will try and negotiate a fee for the music use. So if, for instance, if you use a recording from an orchestra, and there's maybe 50 people in that orchestra, typically those 50 people are going to be, if it's recorded in the US, are going to be a member of either AMF or SAG-AFTRA. And these unions will actually step in to negotiate a license on behalf of those musicians who recorded that music. So, and there are ways around that, of course, because you can always use a recording that is perhaps not recorded in the US or Canada. Like I myself often record new pieces of music in Eastern Europe, in Prague. There's many very, very good orchestras where you can record new music. And these artists will typically not be a member of AFM and SAG-AFTRA. So there you can negotiate with the artist directly. But it's something to keep in mind. If you're using music that is sort of already recorded, existing music, it's good to check if the music you're using is actually part of the AFM and the SAG-AFTRA, if the artist who recorded it are a member there or not, because it can be a nasty surprise in the end if you budget it, but it turns out that the music is still represented by a third party. This maybe goes in a bit deep, but this is how that would look like. And it's a capped fee, so it's a percentage of the total license fee, but there is a cap to it. So let me see here, what's the... Yeah, it says here the maximum is $3,500 for a TV movie license, and the minimum is 100. So it really depends on like how big your movie is, how big the license is. But yeah, if you're using a piece of classical music, typically it can quite quickly become a little bit expensive. So that's that. Now, public domain is something I often get asked about, like how does that work? And I found this really old recording. Can we use it? It depends a little bit about the territory, but there's 3 rules of thumb to go by here. So music is considered to be in the public domain if it meets any of the following criteria. Either the author has explicitly put the work into the public domain. So maybe you've heard about Creative Commons, where it says not all rights reserved, but some rights reserved. If the artist chose to have all of the rights non-reserved, so really specifically and explicitly said this right belongs to everybody, it is considered to be in the public domain. If there was never any copyright, so if something is considered too generic to even be copyrighted, an example of that is a lot of blues music. There is no real source to be found for that because they're all using the same musical patterns. So then you could say, well, it's actually, there wasn't actually ever a copyright. Or, and this is the interesting one, the copyright has expired. And this happens in two cases. If the composer has been dead for 70 years, at least in Europe, now it's 70 years, then the copyright expires. But that doesn't mean the master also is free to use, because that is 50 years after its first release. But as you will know, a lot of labels often issue remasters, so it's often very difficult to find a recording, a master recording that is actually in the public domain. You would actually have to go and dig for the original vinyl record and then the first release for that to be like legally valid. But typically the music that you will find on Spotify or on iTunes, these are all remasters. So even though the song, the composition might be in the public domain, the master often isn't. All right, so how does it work with a license request? Now here it says brand agency, but you can also, of course, put film producer there. So say I'm producing a film and I'm the music supervisor and I need a license of Hello from Adele. So who do I talk to? So first I would negotiate and see if I can make a deal with the Dutch music publisher and the Dutch record label. These parties would then be in contact with the local repertoire owner. In the case of Adele, it's a UK music publisher and a UK record label. Both these parties would be in contact with management. Well, in this case, it's easiest because it's the same management. And they would discuss it with the songwriter and the artist. Again, in this case, it's the same person. But for Hello, as you will see, Gregory Kirsten pops up. So I have to negotiate with three parties. Sony ATV, the publishing house, Universal Music Publishing, and V2, which is the Dutch record label where that represents the master in the Netherlands. These parties then talk to the local repertoire owner. So for the master, it's Excel Recordings UK. And for the publishing, it's Sony ATV UK and Universal Music Publishing UK. These, again, talk to the management. So the management of Gregory discusses with Gregory. And the management of Adele, which is the same person, of course, discusses it with Adele. Well, you can see if there's a lot of songwriters and a lot of, especially samples used, or a band has a lot of members, like let's take the example of Nirvana, where you have Chris Novoselic, Kurt Cobain, and Dave Grohl. These are actually considered three individual artists that might have different managements. So if you're clearing complex songs with a lot of samples or different sound recordings or different artists playing on them, there's actually, even though it's one request, there's a lot of parties to talk to. So I always advise when sending out music licensing requests, really do your research first, know what you're asking, because if one of the songwriters or one of the artists has a question, which is not filled in the initial request, it's going to trickle down all the way down back through your management to the UK publisher, back to the Dutch publisher, back to the brand or agency, in this case me as a music supervisor. I would then have to discuss with the film producer, who might have to discuss with the director. So because songwriting, song rights can be complex, it's always very advisable to when you send out a request, have all the details in place. Know exactly how you're going to use it, what you're going to use it for, because otherwise it can take a long time for something to actually clear. So license fees, this is something we also often get asked about, like how is a license fee made up? What makes it expensive? Why are some songs more expensive than others? And essentially it comes down to what is the type of usage and how long is it? So is it very overtly branded, or is it an art house project, very subtle use? And as you will see here, for instance, the online is actually becoming more and more expensive, and broadcast above the line use is actually lowering a little bit in fees, because, well, guess what? All the content use is going online. And here it says 1 year or 2 year. That's typically for advertising use. For a film, usually you would license something for maybe 10 years, 30 years, 50 years, and sometimes lifetime of copyright. But it might be good to know that a license for 10 years is significantly less expensive than a lifetime of copyright license. Only problem is if you want to still be able to sell your movie after 10 years, you would have to renegotiate a license by that time or replace the music, which is undesirable, of course. So yeah, that is something to take into account, like how are you going to use your music? Sometimes the best thing to do is just license it for festivals and have options for perhaps global use or streaming use in a particular territory. But it all basically comes down to what kind of project is it and what are your ambitions and plans with the film project. This is more for commercial, but here again, just know that business-to-business use, or which actually a festival could be considered business-to-business festival use for a film, license fees are typically a bit lower. Commercial, like blockbuster releases, that's also going to be on streaming platforms, obviously are going to be more expensive. So this is sort of what I keep in mind when I negotiate rights. So these are all the things that you can negotiate about. Well, like I explained before, the context of use. Is it business to business? Is it business to consumer? So is it like a small festival, or are you going to go live on Netflix in 6 countries all at once? These things matter in a music licensing negotiation. And then what is the kind of usage? How long is it? What's the territory? What kind of media are you looking for? Are you just going to sell a couple of hundred DVDs? Or are you going to sell it on Vimeo, for instance? Or are you going to go live with it in cinemas in several countries? Again, these are things that record labels and publishing houses are going to ask about. So it's better to, when you send out a request, have an idea about this. Then, of course, the stature of the recording artist and the songwriter. To give an example, if I was to do a cover of Paul McCartney from the Beatles, my recording wouldn't be worth a lot, but his song, of course, is still worth a lot. So his stature is much bigger than my stature as an artist. And the same goes the other way around. If Paul McCartney would record one of my songs, the master recording would be a lot more expensive than the publishing rights that are in my song. So this is also something to keep in mind, and when you're negotiating music rights, kind of have an idea of what is the stature of the songwriter and the artist involved. Rights owner is also something to keep in mind. Are you negotiating with a major label, a major publishing house, or are you negotiating with an independent label, or even directly with a management? Because if they have all the rights themselves, you can, of course, negotiate with the rights owner, which is then in that case the musician or the songwriter and their management. And typically for major publishing houses and major labels, they're often going to be a little bit more, well, take it or leave it. These are our fees. This is standard for the market. And they might not need the cash flow as bad as an independent songwriter. But a small record label or an independent artist might actually be willing to go for a much lower fee, even that is if it's below market standards. But they would still, just because it's nice cash flow, right, to have their song used, or they just would want to do it because of the media value or the PR value, or they just really like the movie and they want to be in it for free. So also, again, this is something to keep in mind, and it's often not really understood why some music usage is really cheap, and when some music rights are quite expensive. And this often has to do with what is the type of rights owner. Are you negotiating with a major, or are you dealing with an independent party? Then timings, and this is a big one. How urgent do you need a final approval or a final denial of the music rights? So if you're still in script phase, you have all the time in the world. You might have 1 or 2 years before you need to know before you finalize the music. But if it's very urgent, if you're going to go on a festival in 2 weeks and you still haven't cleared the music rights, you can count on that it's going to become more expensive. So I always advise, when you're doing your maybe second or third version of a script, or you're even like when you're still spotting locations, have a think about music rights. What might you run into? Is the person you're gonna shoot a documentary with, is he gonna talk about music? Does he want to play music? And this is always something a music supervisor like myself will always ask questions about, because the earlier you begin with thinking about what kind of music you want to use, the stronger you're going to be in the licensing negotiation. So yeah, this is I can't stress this too much. Like, don't think, oh fuck, we'll deal with music rights at the end, because then we'll know what we're going to use for sure. Usually that turns out to be the more expensive route. It's actually cheaper to spend a little of time and money on research to figure out what you might run into and have some backup plans early in the project. Competitive environment. So let me give you the example here as well. If you're making a documentary about Elvis, you're not going to get away with using just Buddy Holly music there. So there's not a lot of choice in that case. You will be wanting to make to want to use music by Elvis, and of course a publishing house and a record label know this. So this is also going to affect the licensing fees, because there's just less choice for you to choose from. Also, when you're doing these kinds of documentary films about major artists, I always advise to have the labels and the publishers that have the rights involved in an early stage, because yeah, they might be able to flag things and but also give you access to content that otherwise wouldn't be available. And the last one, artist type. Is it a performing artist or is it self-composing? So for instance, Adele being both a performing artist and self-composing, you're just dealing with one party. But if you're dealing with an artist that is only performing and doesn't compose herself, you're going to typically deal with one, maybe two, maybe even more songwriters. So that is something to take into account as well. Like if you find a song that you really like, actually look into, did this person write the song himself or herself? And from there, sort of see how you're going to approach things. Because usually and what often happens is that the film producer reaches out to the artist who just recorded the song, and they will say, yeah, sure, you can use it. But then they forget that actually the song was also composed by maybe 3 or 4 people. And they might have a totally different idea with what they want to do with the song, and maybe already license it to somebody or promise the rights to somebody else, or sign a deal with one of the major record labels. So always keep in mind that it actually matters a lot what kind of artist you're dealing with. So that is basically exactly in the time what I wanted to talk about. And I'm going to open up the floor for questions. So you're gonna, yeah. You can throw me in. How do I do that?
Yes, no, you don't do that. The tech person does that. Okay. Well, thank you so much, first of all, Jarl, for these super complex and interesting insights. I think I want to and also for the audience that's here, feel free to ask your questions. But I want to start with one that's maybe a bit more about your personal connection with this information. Like, you started out as a musician, if I'm not mistaken. So how did you get into this complex web of music rights? Did you come from the other side maybe, and then learned how everything works, and then ended up, doing what you're doing now? Can you talk maybe a little bit about your personal process?
Yeah, sure. This was a bit dry, wasn't it?
No, it's nice. It's very. I think that's exactly what we need to hear, and it's very valuable. But I do want to know what your personal connection with this stuff is.
Yeah, no, I've always been involved with like backstage, basically. So I was secretary for a music venue a long time, programmer, also DJ, and then from that I joined a band, and we played a lot of music, played a lot of festivals. And because that was going well, I decided to quit my studies in media and culture and started studying music management. And at some point, one of our songs ended up in the FIFA 12 football game. And I had no idea how that worked, but I decided to look into it, like, hey, that's interesting. And
that happened without your control, or?
Yeah, well, we were signed to a publishing house, and they pitched our song to the music supervisor of EA Sports. And I asked them actually, like, hey, how does that work? How did you do that? And he said, well, that's the secret of the chef, isn't it? So I decided to follow the money and look into it as part of my music management studies at the Utrecht School of Arts. And since then, I've just, one thing led to another, and I've just, I started getting involved with creating music for advertising, and got involved with Universal. They asked me to be the project manager for a film they were doing. And one thing led to another, and well, you're going to run into all the things that I talked about just now are basically just things that I've run into in my work. Like, hey, I'm negotiating, but I'm stuck. Like, why isn't this artist or giving me his approval? And then I'm realizing, oh, actually, this artist doesn't fit this brand, or they have a totally different. They don't even own the rights to this particular song. That's why it's taking so long. Or the studio, and so. Yeah, I have a very practical background, just sort of, I want to do, like, I did an ice skating show, the music supervision for it, Holiday on Ice, and we wanted an opera recording of 2 Beatles songs. Well, go fix it, like, so where do you start? So you need an orchestra, you don't want to pay union fees, so you need a new recording. Well, you don't want to do it in the US because it's expensive, so you do it in Eastern Europe. And just from doing that, you learn. And then you start negotiating with Sony ATV, which is the publishing house of Paul McCartney. And these are basically the things that you run into, like timings as well. It can take a couple of months for Paul McCartney's legal advisor to get back to you, because he's a busy guy.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, there's already a couple of questions and also some comments, like Anna saying that she's informed and intimidated at the same time. And Matthijs is saying that he's super happy to hear this. And he also has a question that, do you only have to contact via a Buma Stemra mediary, or do you also have to find out which record label and publishing company the artist is attached to? In short, is Buma Stemra like doing the work for you, or do you also have to put in all the work that you were just describing?
Yeah, Buma only has information about if they have the song, and if they do, which publishing house represents it. But you would still have to negotiate with the publisher, who is going to ask the label. But after that, Buma might still be the party who sends the invoice. But again, that is also changing now. In the past, it was very strictly like that. But now you're seeing more and more publishing houses saying, well, actually, we can do it ourselves. We don't need Buma for that. So actually, Sony ATV is now invoicing themselves as well. So yeah, Buma, consider them your as the database, as a very big database of music, and they should have they control a lot of rights, but for music clearances, they're mostly a source of information. You're not dealing with them too much, but they can actually help you and figure out who owns the rights. But often, if they don't know, well, they're not gonna research for you that much. You would still have to go in and really find out. And I've been on really interesting like song searches where we. This is a funny example where we did what was it called again? Wat Is Dan Liefde? That was a Dutch movie, and we wanted a song by André Hazes. Well, it turned out it was a cover from an Italian song in the 1940s or 1950s. Well, all the composers were already dead, so I had to go and seek out their relatives, their family basically. And I told them, hey, like, you might not know this, but your dad wrote a song in the 1950s and 1960s, which became a famous hit in the 1980s. And we now want to do a re-recording of that song. Can we do a license? And of course, these people didn't even know that. So they had a lot of questions, and I just needed them to sign a few papers so they wouldn't get in trouble afterwards. But yeah, you have to do all those things yourself, basically. Buma is not going to help you with that.
I had a question about that. I'll come shortly to the question of Christiana, but like what you're all describing just also sounds incredibly complex, and it is complex for a reason, of course, as you also broke down. But I'm wondering, you already said like some publishing companies are changing also how they, for instance, deal with Buma and Stemra. Do you sense that there's this need maybe also to disrupt or make some of these things more efficient, or do you think that's like an impossible task?
No, that's happening for sure. But you have to keep in mind that's going to happen with new music. So there is a lot of like if you go on YouTube and you just search for library music, there's a shit ton of music out there that is not Buma signed, but it's not going to be famous songs.
Yeah.
Right, because if you have a hit song, anybody, like even the people who hate Buma the most, and there's a lot of musicians and writers that don't really like working with them, but they also understand, well, that's actually the way I make money right now. If my song is being used on YouTube, the only way to make money on that is via the YouTube Content Buddy program, but also by making sure your music is registered at a public rights organization. So yes, there is music. There is music that you can license directly with rights holders, but no, it's not going to be hit songs. It's not going to be music that you will hear on the radio. It's library music. It's stock music.
Yeah.
You can hear it.
All right, thank you. Christiana asks if you've filmed a live performance of an artist performing one of their songs. Do you only need to secure the publishing rights? And what if it's an unreleased track? This question is very good if you're a documentary filmmaker making films about music, of course. Yeah,
it depends what rights the particular artist sold to his label. So if he's fully independent, then he owns all the rights to that particular recording. Then you can just deal with him or her. But if the song, and it doesn't really matter if he wrote it himself, but if it's a song that is signed with a publishing house, you would have to make some kind of agreement with the publishing house. Mm-hmm. And like for something like this could also, if you play it right, if you play it smart, and if you know which sort of buttons to push, you could actually make the case, hey, this is actually going to be has a lot of PR value. You should do this for free, or for just like a symbolic fee, or so there it comes in again, like what are we negotiating about, and do I actually have a case to make it really cheap or make it actually for free?
Yeah.
But if this particular artist already signed all his rights and also as an artist his performance rights, so to a label exclusively, the label is going to be the owner of whatever this particular artist does. You don't see those kind of deals as much anymore. But Robbie Williams, for instance, he sold all his rights, everything, to EMI back in the days, 20 years ago. He sold everything. So basically, if he wanted to jump on camera, he had to ask permission to EMI if he could do that. So he wouldn't be able to sell himself, right, a performance in a documentary to a filmmaker, because he already sold that to his label. So in that case, he would have to say to his management, well, thank you very much for the offer, but this is our record label. They actually own these rights.
Thank you. Well, to maybe follow up on the kind of price range thing, Matthijs is asking another question. What kind of price range do we have to think of for an indie artist from unknown ranging to vrouwtje for a short fiction film? What's something that you should maybe budget if you're working on something?
I could actually go back to, is this screen still open? Can you see this?
Yeah, it's opening up now. Yeah.
So there's a reason why I'm not mentioning fees, because it becomes because it's literally between like 50 euros and 1 million. You know, like it really depends on who you're dealing with, how many samples, all those things. But it also what kind of use are you doing this? So for an indie film, I can imagine you're only doing it on perhaps festivals and online, maybe Vimeo. Indie artists, like if you would use my song, I would maybe ask 200 euros for it, you know, like from my own band. Well, I don't own the rights to much of it because I sold it to a record label. If it was my own stuff, I would say, yeah, sure, use it. And like, what can you miss? No problem. If it's small festivals, typically it starts at 250 euros. And for the bigger songs, say Coldplay for a Dutch film release, maybe between 5,000 and 10,000 euros, depending a little bit on the film, the filmmaker. Is it like a debut film from the director, or is it like an established director? These things come into play then. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks.
Typically for a Dutch romantic comedy feature film, you wouldn't see licenses going above 5, 6, 7K per side. So that's just a recording. Then you pay typically the same fee for the publishing rights. So it usually goes it's double. But again, it's not always double, because my song recorded by Paul McCartney, the recording is going to be more expensive. So you might have to pay Paul McCartney 20,000 euros, and I would say, you know what, just buy me a beer, I'm happy.
Yeah.
So it depends on those kind of things.
Well, Carla Navarro, who is accidentally also organizing maybe this festival, has a question about festivals. What about festivals that are live streaming several concerts, which is also a very interesting new online kind of phenomenon?
Yeah, so that's where this beautiful spider web comes in. So let me see, what are we doing? It's a live performance with an artist. You would have to sort of make a deal with either the booking agent or the manager for the artist, or the DJ to be actually be there. And then you would also have to make a deal for the publishing rights. Or here, a live stream, you could actually see it as a broadcast. So in this case, you would have to make a deal with the Sena and the Buma Stemra. And then it depends, like, on what platform are you going to use it. Do these platforms have deals in place? Are you going to use YouTube? It's always good to check, do they have a deal in place for live streaming? And in most cases, and we talked about this yesterday, Carla, in most cases they don't. Not for live streaming, at least.
All right. Well, I think a final question will be, because we have to go to our next expert talk as well, but you recently founded ClearMusic, right? Which is your own company that deals with this. Can you talk maybe a little bit about the work that you're doing now? Maybe this is a good time to plug your own company as well.
So we do a lot of things. I love to work with creative people. I'm a musician myself, of course, but I love to work with composers and independent artists. So we create music identities. We do for brands typically, but also for movies and for advertising campaigns. And what we also do is music rights clearance for film. So if you already know what song you want to use, we can help you get those rights. But more importantly, which is a lot of fun, is to together find a good music solution for a film project. So that could be whatever you need, recording it with a orchestra in Eastern Europe, or find an indie artist to record it with, or if it depends on the budget, finding library music that is actually gonna produce what you want, those goosebumps and those uplifting of emotions. If you're on a budget, you actually music might be a good way to sort of enhance that emotion that you're looking for. and it all depends, like I love complex copyright matters. I love negotiating with Sony ATV, and they're fun people actually. But it's also always fun to sort of find quick and dirty solutions for sort of things that are on a budget. But it always, like, if you want to work with me, what has happened in the past sometimes is where a film producer calls me up and says, well, we've tried everything. Can you please help us? We made a little bit of a mess out of things here. But typically, I can't do a lot of things then. If you've already been in contact with everybody and they've all told you no, I don't have a magic golden button which I can push and everything is going to happen.
Yeah.
When I can help you is in script phase. So when you're writing that script about the Snoop Dogg meeting up with, and all the music you want to have in there, that's where we can talk. And then actually I can go find maybe songs from Snoop Dogg that are available, or if you really want to use that song, like, what do we need to take into account? Maybe we can actually clear everything for festivals and have options in place for use in streaming platforms. So if, for instance, a Netflix or an Amazon Prime or a Videoland or whatever party shows an interest, you will actually have the paperwork and the negotiations done. You just haven't paid for it yet because you have licensing options in place.
Yeah.
And these are things I can help out with as well, of course.
Cool, that sounds amazing. Well, Jarl, we have to move on, but I see still some questions in the comment section. Is there a way people can reach you outside of this expert talk, maybe, if they have pressing questions?
Yeah, if they have pressing questions, just go to my website, clearmusic.nl. On the first page, you will see a button, schedule a meeting, and it actually schedules an actual meeting directly into my calendar. Please be serious about it, because my time is valuable. But if you want to know more about what we do and need help on a music project or a film project, a first setup call is not going to cost you money right away. I'm not a lawyer like that. It's always nice to know people. And so just go to my website, have a look, schedule a meeting, and we'll talk again.
Cool. Well, Jarl, thanks so much for your insight, for breaking down these complex webs of right owners and agencies and everything in between. It was a pleasure to listen to you talk and explain everything that we should know about this side of the industry. Thanks so much for being with us. Thank you also to everybody that's with us today in Edit Netherlands. This was the second expert talk of today. We'll be back in approximately 10 minutes to talk with Julian Temple, an iconic music video director and filmmaker who has worked with some of the greats, Sex Pistols, David Bowie, Sade, Rolling Stones, Paul McCartney, you name it, he has worked with them. So we're going to do a big tour through his music video career, which is going to be super interesting. So we'll see you all hopefully in a bit. Y'all, thanks again. Have a beautiful day, and we'll hope to see you soon in Edit Netherlands. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.